Right now, please welcome the Beyond the Binary panel in collaboration with My Genderation. We're welcoming on stage two of the trio who run the initiative that makes content about people beyond gender binaries, made by trans and non-binary people. Please give a huge student pride welcome to Fox Fisher and Al Stefania.
Yay. Yay. Hey everybody, how are you doing today? Ooh, it's so exciting. We're really happy to be here, and we've got some wonderful people to have a conversation over the next 45 minutes with. So I would like to introduce everybody else. The third part of My Generation is Mr. Lewis Hancox. Mr. Comedy. And then we've got Isla Oldham as well, who's a helicopter pilot, originally with the RAF, now with the police. And we have Maria as well, who's a non-binary, wonderful human being, who is the third part of there's three non-binary people on this panel, so Maria is the third. We also have Lily Madigan. Lily. You will know Lily from being a wonderful human being, also involved with the Labour Party, and a future MP right here. So what we'll do is we'll start with a pronoun round, just because that's what we usually do. So Maria, would you like to start?
Hi, I'm Maria Manir. My pronouns are they and them.
Lily, she, her.
Fox, they, them.
And Al, they, them.
Lewis, he, him.
And Isla, she, her.
Great. So what's all this non-binary stuff about? So we've kind of, I think about 7 years ago, Lewis and myself were on a documentary called My Transsexual Summer, and it kind of started a dialogue with the nation. It seems like so long ago now, but at the time, and somebody was using the quote just now, the presenter, they were saying that when I was trying to talk about being non-binary, and at the time I was referring to myself as genderqueer, the person filming me kind of put the camera down and said, "Look, Fox, the Channel 4 audience is not going to understand what you're talking about, so can you just simplify your experience for the audience?" And so I was kind of not that confident at the time, so I agreed with that, and we just went on. But I believe that now we're definitely more able to start talking about more, beyond the binary, which is the hashtag of this of today's conversation. So just if we have a quick look in the media in general, and if we kind of look at film, for example, and I'm going to open it up to conversations in a second, but I'm just trying to do my introduction right now. But so if we look at kind of trans people represented in film and television, if we look back, we've got examples of Ace Ventura, when the character discovers that there's a trans woman involved. Often the butt of the joke is, "Oh my God, it's a trans woman," like in the In-Betweeners as well, or even in the Absolutely Fabulous film. It's funny that the person's trans, and that's kind of not going to stand the test of time, I don't think. And if we look at kind of mainstream films, which had a huge effect, and I think more good than bad, but we can discuss this. We can look at The Crying Game, Boys Don't Cry, Trans America, The Danish Girl, Alice Buyers Club, and Pedro Almodovar's All About My Mother. None of those films actually feature a trans person playing the part, and I think that's something that we should also be talking about today. The positive side of things is there's definitely more space for trans people to be involved in film. There's a lot of projects and things like that to elevate trans acting. And of course, trans people shouldn't have to play trans roles as well, and that's where we're going to get to. But there's been some great films in the past couple of years, like Tangerine. I don't know if people have seen Tangerine, but that was involving trans people who had a lot of say from the pitch to the final product. And as we say, nothing about us without us. Another one is Boy Meets Girl, obviously the series in the UK and the film as well, really fantastic film. Both of those products feature trans main character, which is really important. And a fantastic book coming out in the UK in March, and that features a trans woman who plays a trans woman. So that's pretty much where we're at. Just thinking about last year as well, I just want to acknowledge Asia Kate Dillon, who is a non-binary person who received an award for their performance, and I believe that was in the male category. Is that right, Al?
Yeah, I think they basically, because there is no non-binary category, they basically had to choose between the female and the male, and I'm pretty sure it was the male category that they chose for that, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, we're going to show you a quick 2-minute film that features Al and myself, which is, it's just called This Is What Non-Binary Looks Like. And we created this just after we had a particularly difficult conversation with Piers Morgan, kind of justifying who we were. And the really positive thing that happened as a consequence of that was the hashtag This Is What Non-Binary Looks Like that went viral on Twitter. So it's an ongoing thing. If you want to have a look and see what non-binary people look like, or you want to contribute to that, then that's where you'll find it. So can we have the film, please? I'm Fox, and this is what non-binary looks like.
I'm Al, and this is what non-binary looks like. We don't necessarily expect you to know what that means, but let us explain.
I was assigned female at birth.
I was assigned male at birth. While many people understand what it is to be a trans man or a trans woman, being non-binary is still very misunderstood.
Being non-binary means that we identify as neither a man or a woman.
What makes us men or women or non-binary is an inner sense of self.
It's not what genitals we have, what we wear, or who we're attracted to.
It's who we are, which is something no one can take away from us.
Gender identity and gender expression are two different things.
The fact that I present as feminine,
The fact that I present as masculine,
does not make us any less non-binary.
it's just clothes, it's just presentation, it's just a form of expression.
Non-binary people have always existed, and they do so in cultures all around the world.
Non-binary people do not want to erase your identity as a man or a woman.
All non-binary people want is to be respected and acknowledged for who they are.
Non-binary people are real, authentic, and express themselves in so many different ways. We are legally recognized in countries such as Malta, New Zealand, Australia, Nepal, and more.
We encourage all non-binary people to share their selfies under the hashtag #ThisIsWhatNonBinary looks like.
The hashtag is already well and truly underway, and it's a real inspiration for us all.
I'm Al, and this is what non-binary looks like.
I'm Fox, and this is what non-binary looks like. Hey, so Maria, I think there was a screen grab of your tweet there, was there?
There was.
So how did it feel to be involved with that, and how did you experience the hashtag?
See, I saw it because obviously I follow them on Twitter, which everyone should do. And I felt so empowered because, you know, there have been a lot of hashtags going around, like, you know, like Black Men Smile, and like, you know, this is what a black girl looks like, and all these things, like, and it just felt so good to see that non-binary was being acknowledged as well. And for me, it was really empowering because I've often felt, because I kind of present in a way that means people often assume that I'm a woman, I often feel like I'm being excluded from the conversation of what non-binary looks like. Your presentation doesn't have to be androgynous, or you don't have to, you know, look a certain way. I think that's not exactly what being non-binary embodies, that you just disobey those preconceived notions.
Absolutely. Lily, as a binary trans person, how did you, when did you first discover about non-binary people, and how do you think, because I know there's some you know, non-binary people kind of have to justify themselves to cis people, but also to binary trans people as well.
So I didn't really know about binary people until the end of last year, which really isn't great as a trans person. But it's definitely a learning point for me that not all trans people are binary, and I think so I'm here as well to learn from your amazing people.
That's great, thank you, Lily. Lewis, how about you? How do you feel about, you know, as a binary trans person?
Well, yeah, so I come from like a really small town up north, and I had no idea what being trans was in the binary sense, you know, and I just kind of, when I was younger, I always just saw it as this, you know, thing, one to the other kind of thing, and I only kind of went off how I felt as well, always just feeling male. And it was only when I took part in the TV show My Transsexual Summer with Fox that I learned about being non-binary through you, and like I know there's a lot of yeah, there is. It's weird how there's a lot of binary trans people that aren't accepting. I mean, we've, you know, as a binary trans person, I've had to struggle for my identity to be recognised and accepted. So of course I can empathise with, you know, non-binary people or anyone that's struggling with that. So even though I never used to understand what it meant, now that I do, of course, you know, well, of course, it sounds silly to say I accept it. Of course I would, you know, like I can't understand why people wouldn't. So to me, it's a mystery, I guess.
It's a mystery.
Well, you know.
Well, maybe Isla can help us with this. I'm not saying that you're a bigot at all. But why do you think that people, that trans people, binary trans people, might feel threatened by non-binary identities?
I think this boils down to allyship, doesn't it? So I, you know, as a binary trans person, I go through life, and I know that I experience a little bit of cis privilege. You know, people don't always recognise I'm trans, and it's become easier over the last sort of 5-6 years to talk about being trans openly. And there's that fear that if we upset that delicate balance, I've only just crossed the line of acceptability, don't ruin it for me, you know. And I think that's where some of this fear comes from. The only conclusion I could come to was, you know, hell, if I'm asking people to accept me for who I say I am, and they're finally doing that, I have no right to judge anyone else on who they say they are. So even though I don't identify as non-binary, the simple process of saying that this is me is enough for me to be an ally to that way of being.
Absolutely. I think that it's about fragile femininity and fragile masculinity. I suppose when you fight so hard to be accepted in a certain space, maybe the worry is that, you know, people might not accept you for who you are, but as we said in the film, you know, we're not trying to take away from people's identities, you know, as well, that people can identify as a man or a woman, and that's absolutely fine, obviously. So what can we do to improve and elevate non-binary rights in the UK? And I think that we should be very specific to the UK. Al, will you just explain a little bit about what's happening at the moment with legislations and so on?
I mean, I think there's a real change and a shift happening across Europe, especially because there's more and more countries that are recognizing that only allowing certain genders to be recognized legally isn't enough, and there needs to be recognition of more than just male and female or woman and man. And there's countries who are now allowing, for example, X to be put on a passport or on your IDs. And this progress has been happening for about the past 5 years, I would say, but it's really coming to a head now because there's countries such as Malta and Denmark, Nepal, Argentina, and more countries in sort of all around the world, really, that are starting to step up. And where I come from, in Iceland, it's probably going to be one of the next big steps in a legal sense. But you know, it's always a question of how much does legal really affect the social, or does the social affect the legal first? And there's always this conversation. And I think it seems like for non-binary people right now, the legal thing is going to be that's going to come first, and that's going to help us advocate more for the social part. But of course, the social part has affected the legal. We would never be passing laws if there wasn't, you know, advocacy already happening. And yeah, it's an exciting time, I think, but it's going to be a long time until I think we realize that registering gender as an ID in general is just stupid. There's no point in having it, really. And I think, you know, this is a better step than having nothing. So at least if we can have 3, that's better than just having 2. Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't know if people are aware, but we started to make a documentary last year called I Am They, and we'd like to share the trailer of that with you, just to kind of show you where we're at. But it's really funny because we're now being contacted nearly every week by production companies that are so excited to make a non-binary documentary. And you know, it's
the new hype.
It's the new hype. It is. So can we cue the trailer, please?
Most people in society these days understand what it is to be a trans woman or a trans man. But what about trans people who don't identify with the rigid categories of being a man or a woman?
8 girls in her year are now non-binary, right? So schools are now running riot with kids who...
Not running riot.
Yes, they are running riot. When it's 8 kids in 1 year in one school in this country, it means it's now like a contagion.
It's like we're always having to prove who we are, always having to prove our identity. Like, we live this day in, day out, and it's just become this big news story. I'm Fox Fisher. I was assigned female at birth.
I'm Al. I was assigned male at birth.
And we're non-binary, which means that we don't identify as a man or a woman. Want to get protest married?
Yeah, I do.
So, Mario, what kind of things are we struggling with at the moment in the UK, do you think, for non-binary people?
So I've been doing a lot of work with different businesses, or also with the civil service. So I got them to reform the way they do their graduate scheme. So they have, they move gender to the diversity monitoring form, because that's kind of, if you're going to monitor gender, that's where it belongs. Plus they allowed, self-text to define. I think, what you're talking about, Al, with like the social and the legal balance. Yeah, that's really hard, because if there's no political will in Parliament to do things, despite the trans inquiry, despite all that work that's been going on, despite the fact that Norman Lamb MP had an early day motion with over 100 different signatories from across all political parties to introduce X markers and other things, we clearly need to be working on kind of both sides at the same time, because I'm a firm believer that when businesses start to do things, we have to talk about this business case for equality, which really sucks, but that's how this modern day world works. So I think that what we really need to do is make sure that the people who are in a position to influence politicians, so say, for example, businesses, local communities, they need to start having a more inclusive attitude towards gender as well. And I think, we can work in tandem with those enforcing legal change. And I think that's a more holistic way of approaching it, but I definitely think that we need more non-binary people who are actually in the room making the decisions, rather than just being asked as a consultation all the time, because that sucks. I don't want to sit, like, this panel's great, but I don't want to get invited to panels as the non-binary, the Muslim Pakistani person to tell them how to do things.
Yeah, absolutely. Lily, as a future MP, what kind of things, what's the best way to implement change, do you think?
I think it's very important that people in positions are encouraging trans and non-binary people to go for these positions, and I think there's a duty on us to run programs and stuff like that to encourage them to do so, because at the moment there are no non-binary or trans people in the Houses of Parliament. So how are they supposed to adequately pass policies and legislation affecting trans and non-binary people when they're not at the table and contributing?
Absolutely, yeah. So Lewis, so you live with us.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would you think is the future for trans equality and particularly non-binary equality?
I mean, I just think it would be great for non-binary people to be recognised by sort of like, by society in every sense, like health services and things like that too. We were talking about this earlier about how, obviously different people need different things in terms of like access to, whether somebody does want to be on hormones and surgery, and it's not black and white about, how we feel about our bodies, and a lot of, the health services deny non-binary people their rights to access to that, and a lot of non-binary people have to sort of pretend to be binary to get access to things, and you know, and I think that needs to, we've got a long way to go with that, like, you know, being just non-binary identities being recognised, and things like that being made easier, and just, yeah, in so many aspects. You know, I'd love to see more trans and non-binary people out there in the media, like doing things that aren't necessarily trans-related, just, you know, actors, comedians, or whatever someone's career is, but they just happen to be trans or happen to be non-binary, and I think that that can really help people accept us as well.
Absolutely. Isla, have you got any examples of good representation in the media?
Specifically for non-binary people.
Non-binary, for trans people in general as well?
It's increasing, and it's only been in the last 5 years that, you know, trans people have been invited and welcomed to these, you know, certainly national media. So they're few and far between. You know, there's likes of Paris Lees, there's Juno Dawson. You know, very slowly getting out there, but when they are visible, it tends to be, and the Paris and Juno are probably two exceptions to this. Most trans people are visible for being trans, or they're talking about being trans, as, you know, exactly as Lewis says. We need people like, you know, Paris was on Question Time or Newsnight talking about, I don't know, Brexit or other political issues, you know, irrespective of her being trans, and that's critical. That's all about normalising and saying, you know, being trans might, in my case, be the 8th most interesting thing about me. You know, there's lots of other things that we all do.
Absolutely, yeah, I do believe that is the future. And if I just think about the trans people that we know at the moment, you know, we know helicopter pilots and race car drivers and comedians and so on. So I think that probably is the future, very much so. Somebody was having a conversation with me the other day about how in America there are, you know, there are trans people who are actors out there, you know, Laverne Cox and so on. And in the UK, we've yet to have that. And somebody was saying that for trans rights in the UK to move forward, that perhaps it needs to be in film or in music or something like that. I know Sam Smith came out as non-binary. Is that right, recently? I'm seeing nods. Yeah, that's exciting as well. So Al, what do you think that allies can do for trans people and non-binary people? Because I know people often want to help but don't really know how to.
I mean, there's a lot of things that people can do, and it's not so more about, you know, actually you having to do things. It's also about elevating trans and non-binary people and letting them have the voice and giving them the platform, and just generally supporting what trans and non-binary people are doing. I mean, even just the fact that you are at work and perhaps one of your colleagues is trans and you know that they're trans, and then there's a conversation in the workplace about trans issues, but this person isn't necessarily out as trans, and somebody says something offensive or something about trans people. It's a really great thing for you as an ally to be able to stand up for trans people in that situation, because trans people are constantly put in this situation to have to defend themselves over and over and over again. And trans people alone, even though we seem to be the most scariest group in society right now, it's gonna, you know, destroy the foundations of society, we're still a really, really small group, and we can't win this without allies. We can't fight prejudice. We can't make social and legal change without allies. So allies play, you know, a pivotal part in trans people actually getting the rights they need, and just speak up and, you know, retweet things, share a story, go see films about trans people. Anything you do will make a difference. It doesn't have to be a big activist thing where you show up to every protest there is, even though that's amazing if you can and have the energy to be able to do that. But it's also about the small things, and also about reaching out to the trans people you know and asking them, are you okay? How can I help? Is there anything you want me to do? And just that one question is already, you know, contributing to helping trans people.
That goes a long way.
Yeah.
Mario, have you got any thoughts about that? About what allies can do to assist trans people and non-binary people?
You see, I'm in this really weird situation where even when I can be wearing a pronoun badge saying like they, them, I will have people say, this is Maria, she uses they, them. Like, this doesn't really make any sense. I mean, you're kind of acknowledging it, kind of not. I don't really know what you're trying to do. And I think that partly this comes into education in schools. Like, we need better LGBT-focused education in schools. I was really surprised, you know, that my old school is starting to have like little feminist spin-off groups where they kind of educate themselves and things like that, which is really empowering. But that doesn't happen in every school. Not every school has the resources to do that. But I think to be better allies, like, you have to have the difficult conversations. Sometimes you will make mistakes. In fact, you will be making mistakes all the time at the beginning. I remember at the beginning I was misgendering myself constantly before I got used to it. And it's not bad to make a mistake, I don't think, so long as you acknowledge the consequences and try and better yourself. And I think we're in like, when I meet people and they're like, oh, you're non-binary, like they really have to squeeze it out because they're so afraid that they're going to mess up. And it's like, no, it's okay if you mess up because this society is bloody messed up. We'll figure it out together.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. And I think that it is important to remember that none of us were born knowing the language or about trans issues, and we all learned it ourselves, and language is constantly evolving.
It's also a cultural thing about how you are able to articulate what being trans is. So, I mean, I come from Iceland, and there's certain things about how people explain being trans which is slightly different. There's slightly different nuances which have to do with cultural significance. So we also have to realize that, you know, there's so many different ways of explaining being trans and so many different experiences that, you know, we can't just have one explanation, this is what trans is, and everybody agrees, because it doesn't work like that.
It's funny because when I came out, the first thing people from my community said to me, are you gay? Because that's the only word that they knew. And they didn't know how, they didn't understand anything else. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. So what does the future look like for trans awareness and understanding? Isla, any ideas of what this utopian future would be like?
We're not going to get there instantly. I think it's the first thing to recognize. I see it as lots of stages. So we have this grand idea where it's, you know, a future where there are no eggshells. You know, people are, you know, all very woke and they're quite happy to talk about these subjects. The future is where, you know, kids growing up particularly aren't afraid to be who they are. They don't have to question, oh, will I fit in? Do I have to try and pretend to be something I'm not, just to get through life, just to get through school, just to get a job? And that at each stage, you know, going through university, you might be in one environment where you feel safe and secure, that when you go off to work afterwards, that you don't have to suddenly find yourself back in the closet or, you know, hiding again, because that's kind of defeating the objects. So making sure that we keep the message going, and not accepting that the job's done. Yeah. I don't think we'll ever be at the stage where we say we're done now. It comes back to your first question, you know, about being an ally as a binary trans person with non-binary people. It's, if I was to say, right, we're done now because I've got my equality, I'm fine, Jack, thanks, would be pulling the drawbridge up, and, you know, that's not done. So accepting that we're not.
Totally. Lewis, what kind of benefit do you think social media has had on trans awareness?
I think social media has been amazing. For me, I found all the information I needed to know through social media. You know, watching people on YouTube and things like that. Social media is, you know, the future. Like, most young kids would much rather watch videos online than TV these days. You know, and it just gives. It's just everyone just gets. You get your own platform, don't you? You don't need to, like, jump through hoops to put yourself out there. There's so many trans and non-binary people online that have, you know, big followings and things like that. And I think that is, you know, definitely the way forwards. And yeah, I mean, you know, TV obviously still, they still put documentaries and things like that out there, but it's just like, it's just twisted in a way that it is sensationalized and it doesn't tell people's stories authentically at all. So to have trans people putting out their own content that, you know, hasn't gone through anybody else, that's just, you know, amazing. So yeah, and also, as I said before, sort of hopefully it'll get to the point where you have people that are known for things that aren't, you know, they just happen to be trans, and people, you know, I was doing lots of comedy videos myself over the past year and a half, and I sort of built up a following from that. And funnily enough, a lot of my followers like didn't know I was trans, like even though I'd sort of come out on TV a few years previously, and then I sort of came out again to my following, and that was really, I just like I've come out so many times now, but it was really cool because I got a lot of messages from people saying, oh my God, like we loved your videos and we had no idea that you were trans. And I had trans people tell me that, like that, you know, they were really happy to see a trans person out there, but then also people that weren't trans that seemed to, you know, I guess it helped them understand or accept it a bit more, because they were kind of like, you know, they sort of admired the work I did, and I suppose were a bit of a fan of. What was it?
First and foremost, they loved you for your work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then they found out I was trans, and you know, it wasn't a big deal. So I guess that's sort of like, I'd like to see more of that. Hopefully, that'll be, you know, more and more of that.
Great. I know the Stonewall School report came out recently, and there were some very interesting statistics for young people. Al, do you remember?
I mean, I think it was quite alarming, the actual rates. I think about 84% of trans youth had self-harmed, and it showed that up to half of them had attempted suicide. And it just goes to show that trans people still have a long way to go before we can feel safe in society, because it was mainly because they felt stigmatized, or they felt victimized, or they felt like they couldn't be themselves in their environments. And I think, while at the same time we are moving forward quite fast and we are reaching all these goalposts and we're making progress, we're also still seeing a backlash, and we can't forget that, even though we're making this progress. And yeah, so that the school report actually reveals quite a lot. You can find it on the Stonewall website, and a lot of other resources as well.
I suppose we can't ignore, well, we don't even want to ignore it. There's a wonderful organization called All About Trans who really helps to improve representation in the media. Lily, have you heard of the organization? No. Well, let me tell you. There's a really great organization called All About Trans, and they've been around for about 5 or 6 years. And they go to various organizations like the BBC, Channel 4, The Sun, we've gone to, the Daily Mail, to basically give a human reference point of what it's like to be trans. They're very simple conversations that happen behind the scenes, and it usually involves a bunch of gatekeepers from the organization, people who make big decisions about stuff. They might be making the tabloid headlines, and so on, and they hook them up with trans people, and we just sit there in a room, or we might go to an aquarium, or you know, if we're lucky, or somewhere similar to a restaurant perhaps, and just chat to them. And it's been a very helpful interaction, but there are a few downsides to it, I suppose, that there's a huge turnaround as well in the media, and people, if you make a connection with somebody, sometimes they might leave and go somewhere else, or disappear, so you kind of have to constantly be doing that. But Al, did you?
You can't force it on people to have a meeting with All About Trans, and I mean, the ones who need it the most are probably the ones that don't do it, so it's always a constant struggle to get, you know, reach the people that need it the most, because they're often the ones who just don't want to hear it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Lewis, what was an interaction that you really benefited from?
We had an interaction that was at the aquarium, actually. With we met with Ian, with Ian Critchley, who worked at the BBC at the time. But that was I just remember that being a lovely chat. He happened to be from the same town as me, St Helens, which is kind of strange, like nobody's ever from there, but we got on so well, and we've kept in touch ever since. And I know, you know, you share a lot of work with him, and he's a great advisor. I mean, they were quite a while ago when I did them, to be honest, but I did find them really great to just sit and chat to people. And we didn't even talk everything trans either. It was just about connecting. And I'm sure some of them probably think they've never met a trans person before. I mean, they might have done and just not known it, but I think it's good for them to just like meet us and see that we're just humans, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember when we had an interaction with the Sun newspaper, and Isla was there as well. And I don't know if anyone saw the headline at the time, but there was a horrific headline about Isla. Do you want to explain about it?
Yeah, I can laugh now, of course. The headline was Will's pal loses his chopper, which I'm sure in the meeting that had that, they thought it was hilarious. They struck gold. So yeah, it was flying helicopters, you know, text change. I shouldn't have to explain that, should I? That was normalised, 2010. So it was in the Sun. It was picked up by the Daily Mail and various others, and it was all male pronouns and a trans man calling himself Isla, pretending to be a woman was the narrative behind it. It was horrendous to go through, and you held up for public ridicule. That's been a significant change. So while we're still seeing a backlash, and that's one of the negatives, as Al says, this visibility and positivity, is you get this backlash. At the very least, the language has shifted since 6, 7, 8 years ago, and that's step one. We're now in sort of phase 2, phase 3.
And weren't they able to actually remove
Stig Abel was the managing editor at the time, so he was in one of those in the meeting, and as I was talking, he was typing into Google, and he went, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. This is atrocious," and that day took it down. So their heart was in the right place. They didn't know what they were doing was wrong. Right. But bravo to the Sun for taking that down. People have changed. We have to keep the message going back and saying, guys, you can do better still. But I think what was important was humanizing it. As soon as they met a trans person, as you say, in a room full of people, and we didn't have to go in and say, poke the chest and say, "Oh, you be nice to us because it's hard being trans." We just have to say, "Look, we're people like you," and have a conversation about, where you're born and, fish tanks and cake. And by putting that human face on it, that did away with all of the eggshells and the worrying about what terminology you're using and what criteria you're hitting, what label you're applying to someone. Suddenly the labels became just a tool to describe humans.
Absolutely. It's very, very helpful, isn't it, just to be able to talk to people and not be, even if we might be upset about something, I know there's a lot of upset and there's a lot of anger about being treated a certain way. Lily, how effective do you think it is to be angry about something, in order to get something changed?
Oh gosh, anger's always good in moderation. Mm-hmm. It's good to be annoyed enough to do something. That's very important. But also I'd say it has to go beyond just feelings at this point. It has to be something we're routinely doing, calling out transphobia and just advocating to push trans people into positions at this point.
Absolutely. And Maria, what do you think about the new generation of people who seem to be less tied down by labels? Do you think that this is a positive? Obviously, it's a positive thing, but do you think we're going to enter a new realm? Perhaps where gender and sexuality don't mean so much.
I hope so, because I want to be there. Yeah. But no, I think it's great because for example, I have a younger cousin who's 10, and in her school they had a role model program where they came in and they kind of said, okay, what does it mean to be a girl? And they broke it down, and it was, they took them to all these places and showed them this is where you can be in power, you can think about your world in a different perspective. I think things like that are really good. But the other thing is I've obviously had my fair share of harassment on radio. Radio is the worst because they say whatever they want in their heads, and they're like, "Oh, do you feel like you're a chair?" Or, "Oh, do you have a uterus? Will you have babies? Can you have babies?" When people hear that, though, when they think about it and they go, "Oh my God, that's horrible. Why would anyone say that?" It's like you said, Isla, about humanizing effect. People go, "Wait, why is this acceptable?" We need to enter a realm where people wonder, why do we accept things as they are? And I think that's what the kind of shift I'm seeing. The more okay, some op-eds can be a bit weird, but the more we're kind of out there, I think people will start to be like, well, Why have we got to live with things just because that's how it's always been? That was never a good enough excuse to allow human rights violations to continue, was it?
Absolutely. I think being out is still a political statement, for sure. Al, what do you think the future looks like?
I mean, I think we're always making progress, but there seems to be sort of a backlash everywhere in the world, really, you know, with politics in specific. But I'm always hopeful because I feel like things have changed so much in the past 10 years. Since I've been out, there has been a major shift. And but we're still at the point where there's a sentence that has been going on in my mind right now, which is just that trans women are women and trans men are men and non-binary people are real and valid. And the fact that I feel like I need to say this sentence says a lot about where we still are. We're still fighting with these basic understanding of what it is to be trans. But I feel that I see more and more people saying that, and not necessarily trans people themselves. I feel like there's more and more people speaking up, and I think, yeah, I'm positive, even though it's sometimes a bit gloomy, especially when I look on Twitter, but you know, that's how it is.
Absolutely. Well, we're pretty much finishing up the end of our panel chat now. We're just going to go around and show you how you can find us on social media as well. So Maria, where can we find you?
Cool, you can find me at Maria, spelled Maria_Munir, MUNIR. Yes, I know being brown has its weird perks. So I'm sure you'll be able to find me. Just Google Obama Maria and you'll find me. I hope.
Lily, where can we find you?
So I'm on Twitter. If you Google me, it should just come up.
Cool. Lily Madigan. I'm there as TheFoxFisher, or check out My Generation on YouTube.
I have a stupid Icelandic handle on my Twitter, so everybody's never going to remember this, but it's Ugla Stefania, which is UGLASTEFANIA, or you can Google Owl, and then I'm pretty sure I'll come up eventually. Yeah.
Lewis?
So my Facebook page is Lewis Hancox, which is spelled Hancox, and my Instagram's Lewis Hancox Films. My YouTube's just Lewis Hancox. Yeah, it's pretty simple.
I love.
If I Google owl now, actually you come up above birds, which is great.
Perfect.
Google's learning. So I'm everywhere. Instagram, Twitter's probably the best. At Isla Holden, one word. But Google me, I'm everywhere.
Perfect.
And probably on here as well.
Great. Well, I just want to thank everyone for a conversation. It's an ongoing one, as you know, but it's really lovely to be having these conversations. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.